Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 45, Euthyphro 7c to 8b. Euthyphro has just suggested that what is common to all things holy is that they are loved by the gods. But Socrates has pointed out that, according to Greek mythology, the Greek gods differ among themselves on various topics. But when he asks Euthyphro what could be the topics upon which the gods disagree, Euthyphro doesn't know. So Socrates has started to help him out. First of all, he looks at issues where everyone can come to an agreement, things where you can measure and weigh and calculate. These things we can disagree on at the beginning, but then we come to an agreement. Therefore, Socrates will now ask again on what issues the Greek gods differ. Socrates doesn't specify Greek gods or Greek mythology, but these are the gods discussed here. Not that it matters, because Socrates begins by talking about us, humans, not the gods. He'll return to the gods a little later on. Peritinos de dienexentes kai epitina krisin udunaminoi afikestai echthroigean alelois emen kai orgezoimetha. Differing and failing to come to a decision about what would we become hostile to each other and angry. As I pointed out at the end of the last episode, there's no reason for people who disagree on something to become hostile to each other and angry. For example, in dialectic, this is the whole point of dialectic, that we can discuss things together and eventually come to an agreement, preferably because we agree on what is true and real. Socrates, however, is talking to a man who believes in mythology. He believes that the gods are like this. They get angry with each other. And he has never actually asked himself why they get angry, what is common to all of the differences of opinion among the gods. What does seem clear to Euthyphro is that if you have a difference of opinion, you do become hostile to the others. You do get angry with them. He's a very confrontational person. So this is just one more example among many of Socrates using the mindset of his interlocutor. Socrates himself doesn't get angry with other people. He doesn't become hostile. Although some modern scholars think this is exactly what Socrates does because he asks people difficult questions, and that isn't nice. Socrates exploits Euthyphro's mindset by turning the issue of hostility towards differences of opinion. This would never have occurred to Euthyphro, but now he is obliged to talk about the difference of opinion. Euthyphro clearly hesitates yet again, because now Socrates says, Issos ou procheron soiestin. Perhaps you don't have it at hand. That is, the subject about which we all differ doesn't come readily to mind. Al emu legontos, scope e tade esti, tote dikaion kai to adikon, kai kolon kai aischron, kai agathon kai kokon. Well, while I'm talking, see if these are the subjects, basically. The just and the unjust, the beautiful and the ugly, and the good and the bad. The good, the just, and the beautiful seems to have been one way that thinkers treated ethics before they had a term for ethics. For example, there is a sophistic text from about 400 BC which deals with these terms exactly. We don't know when Plato wrote his dialogues exactly, but they were written after the death of Socrates, which was in 399. The sophistic text, Dissoi Logoi, is dated to around 400, and it is certainly earlier than the dialogue Euthyphro. Ara utautaistin perihondia nechthentes, kai udunamenoi epi hikenen krisin auton elthen, echthroielelois gignometha, hotan gignometha, kai go, kai su, kai hoialloi anthropoi pantes. Al estin haute he diaphorau Socrates, kai peri tuton. Aren't these the things about which, when we differ and cannot come to a sufficient decision about them, we become hostile to each other? Whenever we do become hostile to each other, both I and you and all other humans. Yes, this is the difference, Socrates, and about these things. In this dialogue, it seems to be a good idea to refer back all the time to Euthyphro's own trial, which is what Euthyphro himself does most of the time. In the trial, the question is not whether there is justice, but which act is just, whether his father did the right thing or whether Euthyphro is doing the right thing in prosecuting his father. Socrates now brings the conversation back to the gods. Tide hoi theoi, o Euthyphron, uk eper ti diaferontai di auta tauta diaferointan, pole ananke. And what about the gods, Euthyphro? Isn't it the case that if they differ, they would differ about these very things? A great necessity. Euthyphro now sounds very certain, but we have to remember that he hadn't really considered the issue before Socrates asked him. Kaiton theonara, o genaia Euthyphron, aloi alla dikaia heguntai katatoson logon, kai kala, kai ischra, kai agatha, kai kaka, ugar anpu estasiadzon alelois e me perituton diaferonto, egar, orthos leges. And of the gods then, O noble Euthyphro, some consider some things just, and others consider other things just, according to your argument. And beautiful and ugly things, that is, fine and base things, and good and bad things. For I suppose there wouldn't be strife among them if they didn't differ about these things. Is that right? You speak correctly. Ukun haper kala heguntai hekastoi, kai agatha kai dikaya, tauta kai philusin, tadenantia tuton misusin, panuge. Therefore, the things each consider beautiful and good and just, these they love, but the opposite of these they hate, absolutely. It does sound plausible that if you love beautiful things, you will hate ugly things, but is this really the case in Greek mythology? Gods and goddesses would compete over who was the most beautiful, but when it comes to ugly, they don't actually hate ugly people or ugly things, they despise them, they mock them. If they hate anyone, it's people who deprive them of their honor or attempt to deprive them of their honor. They hate people who think that they are better than the gods, for example. The whole premise then of factions being formed over differences concerning just things and unjust things, beautiful things, ugly things, good things, bad things, is a bit shaky, but the point stands that on these particular issues, it's harder to come to a scientific, objective decision. We have to remember that here Socrates is exploiting the opinions of Euthyphro, his interlocutor, and it is Euthyphro who relishes his knowledge of the strife among the gods, and it is Euthyphro who has described to hosion as beloved by the gods. So let's see where Socrates is going with this argument. tautadege hos ufes, hoimen dikaia heguntai, hoide adica, periha, kai amphispetuntes stasiadzus itikaia polemusia lelois. Ara huto. The very same things then, so you claim, some consider just, others consider unjust, about which, by disagreeing, they form factions and fight each other. Isn't it thus? Thus, taut ara hos eoiken miseitai te upotan theon kai philetai, kai theo misete kai theo phile taut an ee. Eoiken. The same things, then, so it seems, are both hated by the gods and loved. And the God-hated and the God-loved would be the same things. So it seems. Kai hosia ara kai anosia tau ta an ee, o Euthyphron, tutoto logo, kindun iue. And holy things, then, and unholy things would be the same, Euthyphro, by this argument. Maybe. Uk ara ho eromen apekrino thamasia. So you haven't answered what I asked, O wonderful man. Ugar tu toge eroton, hotun chane tauton on hosion te kai anosion, hodan theophiles kai theomeses estin hos eoiken. For I wasn't asking this, what happens to be the same, both holy and unholy. What would be God-loved is also God-hated, so it seems. Hoste o Euthyphron, hosu nun poies ton patera coladzon, uden thamastone tutodron, tomen dii prosphiles poies, to de chrono kai to urano echthron, kai tomen hephaisto philon, te de hera echthron, kai etisaros ton theon heteros hetero diapheritai periautu, kai kenois katatauta. So that, Euthyphro, what you are now doing, punishing your father, it isn't surprising if by doing this you are doing something God loved to Zeus. This sounds a bit strange, but we're using the term Euthyphro used to describe Procyon, the gods loved, the thing loved by the gods. And here Socrates is saying that it may be God loved to Zeus, but you may be doing something hostile to Kronos and Uranos. These were the ones who were victims of their sons' actions. And you were doing something dear to Hephaestus, but hostile to Hera. And if anyone else of the gods differs from any other of the gods about this, to those as well, according to the same things. In other words, the same principles. So hosion isn't what is loved by the gods. Or is it? We'll carry on with this argument next time.